Hey, thanks for downloading, listening to, and watching the Lean Into Artcast, the show where a couple visual storytellers get together, take on topics that come up naturally when you start. When you take on this endeavor of communicating visually. We think hard about this stuff, so you will too. My name is Jerzy Droz, cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hi, I'm Rob Stenzinger, user experience and game designer.
Rob, good to see you again.
Jerzy. Good to see you.
User experience. Just, I'm going to try to be more fastidious or conscientious about this. Every once in a while, somebody is new to the show and they hear the term user experience designer. What does that mean in a nutshell?
Let's see. So user experience designer takes into account that sort of how are people affected by the things that we make, and how might we make them in a way that we bring about desired outcomes, both for ourselves, the makers, and then the those that are using, engaging, consuming, and that it can be, let's see, like all areas of design, you're using constraints and context and making choices to try to find a good fit between available materials and what you're putting into the world and how it gets used and stuff. And the user experience aspect of it has a lot of different potential focuses, because some UX folks are thinking about, okay, all these goals, did some research and have informed a design, and now I present like a blueprint or sort of wireframes or like a flow, sort of planning things out, more strategically or what have you, all the way down to some UX folks build screens and whatnot. Some have nothing to do with UI, and they're thinking more about like a business as a whole. And what's the experience of your business? And UX being omnidirectional, both the people that are within your business and those that are, served by it. So yeah, it's a lot of ways where you can channel research and insight into ideas that can be tested when you put them into the world.
You make things for people and you test the things that you make for the people. And that's kind of like directly ties into our topic, not user experience per se, but some of the principles that you use in that are what we use in this business of making these little things called Minicomics, which we talk about a lot in the show. Why? Because I love them. I love them to death. And I think that they are a fabulous way to get your feet wet making something. They're a fabulous way to prove to yourself that you can ship something, because, when you do like an 8-page Minicomic like this, you can do it in a week, with spare time. And that is a short enough period of time that, it's not a huge commitment.
A week? Wait, you're showing Pickles and Taft and going like, it's, this is a week.
Pickles and Taft was it was, I want to say 6 weeks of just doing it in spare time. So it was
okay.
But
okay, so this was more time into it.
This was literally a week. I did this one, the very first Boulder and Fleet story I did in 1 week,
nice.
just to see if I could do it. Back in like the 90s when I was first starting out, I did a mini comic series called The Black Hole Equation. And there is, I think, the second issue that I did, which was 8 pages. I did it in an afternoon. I mean, I drew the whole 8-page story. I don't remember how many hours it was, but it was done in a day. So
also, Chud with a Dream. We got to bring that up again. It's been a while.
Chud with a Dream, which I can find it real quick. Well, that one is that one. I think I did it in an hour and a half. I think hour and a half.
Okay, so these are a lot of tight time frames that.
Here we go.
Different extremes, but I mean, an hour is pretty approachable, or a day.
Before anybody gets excited, let me pull up the Chud with a Dream, because if you're watching on video, it ain't super fancy, right? This was drawn very sketchy. This is like, I would almost call this a thumbnail, right? And I think there are multiple panels on some pages, but there's a lot of full page spreads, 3 panels. You're the worst ever.
You can't fire me. Or it's probably more like, you can't fire me. I quit.
Then you don't get unemployment. Gah!
Ah.
But see, his parents are trying to convince him to go home. You're just a chud after all. And then maybe the answer's at the library. Uses the free internet to find Craigslist listing for a job opening for a monster, and he becomes a movie monster. But that leads to the other part of this is that we talked about experimentation. And another reason I love them so much is that it is a way to test drive ideas in a very safe way. It's not a huge investment. That Chud with a Dream, if I decided that, wow, that was really good. I didn't decide that, but if I decided that was really good, I could do a more refined version of it later on or expand upon it, which is what happened with Boulder and Fleet. That was like a test drive idea that I put out into the world, got feedback on it, and revised and revamped and built upon the ideas that were in this 1 week long experiment. Now, last week, we did an episode called Setting Projects Up for Whittling, where we talked about how to frame our projects and sort of set up workflows for our projects so that we can check in with little tiny bits here and there in order to slowly accumulate some effort and hopefully eventually have something that you can ship. In the discussion, I sort of floated around this idea of like, oh, I might do something for Inktober this year where I just like try to quickly write an 8-page thumbnail and then divide that up over the course of the 30 days of Inktober. So maybe it's 30 panels spread over 8 pages. So I'm making a panel a day in order to set that project up for whittling, which led me to thinking about, well, now I got to write a mini comic. And that got me thinking, well, what are the things I think about? Well, how do I know when an experiment is ready to go from hypothesis stage to testing stage? So then it can become a theory, right?
Yeah.
So
okay. And then, I mean, hence inspiration for this episode, right?
So with that, I mean, are we ready just to like dive into talking about it? When we hit the music?
Sure. Let's go on the ground.
Let's go on the ground. Wait, I hit the wrong music. I want this music.
All right.
Now I can never change that. I mean, if I do, it'll have to be like the different Dragon Ball series. But it's always gonna have to be Dragon Ball that takes us into the first half of the show now.
It's honestly, it's tough to beat the first Dragon Ball theme. I mean, yeah.
I got to go back and revisit Dragon Ball Z. I don't remember that theme at all.
It's I like it. It's, you know, it's solid. It fits the series, but it's more it's crunchy crunchy guitar, you know, more than like funk time. Let's get up and move, you know. It's not the same. It's more like you might sit there and nod your head, right? Because it's yeah, different tone, more serious.
All right, well, let's dive in and talk about like on the ground. What does it look like to get ready to make a mini comic? And I thought very, very quickly we could talk about like assembling your resources, both physical resources and what do you call it in video game design? The little sprites and artifacts that appear in the game.
Assets.
Yes. So first up is this reminds me of another episode we did not too long ago, episode 212, writing with sticky notes. Get your sticky notes. These are an essential part of my writing process nowadays, and that hasn't always been. But it's a you draw something this small on the size of like a Post-it note or a sticky note. You don't have time or the space to really work on fancy rendering and show off your drawing skills. You are just thinking about getting the visual beats of your story worked out. You don't have room for dialogue, right? So it's like this is a great way to just focus on what is the essential squint test version of the page.
And are you always working at a full page when you're doing a Post-it? Do you sometimes zoom in?
Sometimes I do. Yes. Yes.
Hmm.
Sometimes if a moment really stands out, comics panels come in two varieties for me when I'm thumbnailing. There is a very hazy looking through a fog version where it's like, I think it'd be a pose kind of like this, but I'm not sure. And then there's moments that are absolutely crystallized where I see it in my head. I see the pose. I even have the turn of phrase like instantly that comes to mind. And maybe I don't have the before or after, but I have that moment that hangs in my head. And I know just how I would draw it. And so that I'll sketch it out like pretty, like a fairly little bit more detail. And I'll give it its own sticky note sometimes. But I would say 90% of the time I'm working at the full page on a sticky note.
Hmm.
Um, the next resource is something that I'm going to share in the show notes for everybody to use if they want. Now, let me get my whenever I move from sticky note to second draft of thumbnails. So okay, so here's actually the new comic I'm working on right now with Dan Michigan. Secret. This is a scoop, an exclusive. So there's the sticky note version of a page, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't even
I
see
see. So
dialogue.
it's
Yeah.
you have it's a little bit of balloon spotting along with like what framing, but like at the really abstract level of detail, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, sketchy. It's not stick figures. There's like a lot of shape there. Can tell there's it's so funny. It's like how it's like your style, but the ultra minimalist version.
Ultra minimalist. They don't even draw the faces. And then from there, I go to my second draft, and this is what becomes my proper script that I work from. And it is, as you can see, a letter size sheet of paper, just turned sideways.
Mm.
And I actually print it. You can probably, if you look closely, there is a blue line frame of the aspect ratio of the page that I'll be working on, shrunk down to this size.
Mm.
And I do my second round of sketches on that. Now, that said, I actually have a PDF that I'm going to link to in the show notes of that. This is the Minicomic aspect ratio. So this is the same aspect ratio as my Boulder and Fleet Minicomics, Pickles and Taft. The Minicomic that is roughly 1/4 the size of a letter size sheet of paper. And you can print this out double-sided on your inkjet printer, and then you will have a non-photo blue live area to work within. It's just a nice handy way to like speed up the process of working on your script.
Well, I mean, it sets you up to be directionally accurate. Having that incorrect aspect ratio could be quite a pain to deal with later. It's like you're almost injecting a bug or problem in your layout and your process by not trying to consider the aspect ratio. So why not just bring it in?
And I mean, Robert Clemens Jr. is in the chat and is being cheeky and saying like Minicomic script. What Minicomic script? Yes, that is part of the fun of Minicomics too, is that you can just completely improvise them. But in the case of this thinking exercise, what I try to do is, and just as Rob was describing with the PDF template, I try to set myself up for success as much as possible so that I can focus on as few difficult decision making processes as possible. If I set up the page at the wrong aspect ratio and then import it into Clip Studio Paint or print it out in non-photo blue and start inking it up, I don't want to have to adjust the art too much. Right? I want those thumbnails when I do them at that stage to be as ready to go as possible. This is all about like making this process super expedient. And then it comes to like what drawing supplies you're going to use. Like I just said, are you going to use like Clip Studio Paint? Are you going to use like your phone? Are you going to just print out the thumbnails on Bristol board or use a light box? Pencils and pens, clipboard. For me, whatever way I do it, I try to keep it as mobile as possible because this is something I do on the side. So I want to give myself as many opportunities to do it in as many places as possible. What does that mean? That means like when I were to take these, if I were to take these Amazon Academy pages I was showing a minute ago, and I were to put these on Bristol, let's say I was going to ink these on the boards, what I might do is print out, like scan and print out these thumbnails in non-photo blue at like 20% or 15%. And then, but I'd print them out at 8.5 by 11, not 10 by 15, like I used to do in the old days. Something that can fit in my shoulder bag, so that I can refine the pencils if I'm sitting and waiting in the car for something, or if I'm at the grocery store, or if I'm any place where I have a few minutes to whittle to hearken to last week's episode, right? So, yeah.
How ready are you with like the message of your story at this point? Like when you before you jump into your sticky notes, is there some, I guess, how much do you know about what you want to say? Or are you like was pointed out in the chat, doing a little bit of improv at that point? Because you mentioned in your process that you outline maybe later, or is that what you're carrying with you in before the?
Oh yeah, that's so that all happens before I start with the stage. And I got that set up for the second half of the show. I actually have the full process of how I made the Pickles and Taft mini comic, and I actually have like my first draft script, second draft outline, and then to the thumbnails. Which I'll show you how that all looks in my sketchbook. But I was reminded last week we were talking about how sometimes whittling can be product development in your sketchbook, right?
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So,
because like, for instance, where would even the basic character designs come from?
Right. And actually, well, no, I can pull those up right now. Let me where do the character designs come from? Let me pull up from my sketchbook and I will share this with everybody. So here is, and let me just real quick. First, I'll show everybody. This is Pickles and Taft Adventures for Hire. If you haven't read it, you can download it for free on Gumroad. Find it right on my website. At a price of your choosing. At a price of your choosing. jdros.com is where you can find it in the sidebar.
$3 sounds pretty fair. $5 even.
It is quality work. And what's it about? It's about a pig and her battle tortoise, and they are adventures for hire, just like Boulder and Fleet. And they get involved with what they think is going to be this epic adventure, and it turns out to be not all adventures are super epic. Although there is like some pretty cool action sequencing happening here. And Pickles is really upbeat and cheerful, and Taft is like a little bit more down to earth, realistic, maybe even a little glum. Not dissimilar from, Two Pizza Team, but that's a dynamic that I really enjoy. I really like really optimistic and really grounded characters interacting. And in my experience, those kinds of personalities tend to gravitate towards one another. But let's look at the script. So what I start with is I just come up with a basic premise, right? So like Pickles and Taft want to go to this Oktoberfest kind of thing. Because Pickles really loves to dance, but they don't have any money, because that's always a good motivator. It's like, well, we got to get money, so we got to go on an adventure now. So I just start writing out sentences and drawing little tiny moments from the story in my sketchbook. Right? They get to the gate, and the guy at the gate's like, "Oh, you got to, 3 gold coins ahead." She's like, "Oh, nuts! I only got 6 wooden coins." And she's trying to convince Taft to go on this adventure with her, and she's like wafting the smell of pierogi from the October festival, and he's like, "Oh man, I really got to go now." And so I'm sort of like just doing like the children's book version of the story, where I'm highlighting some key moments of the story. And actually, in the original draft, look at they come across this rat wizard, this little old lady rat, and then Anne pointed out, she's like, "Well, that's just Splinter from the Ninja Turtles." Like, oh man. So. And then I sketch out they climb the mountain. There's this evil wizard chicken at the top of the mountain throwing lightning bolts at them. Some cool action moments where Pickles and Taft help each other. And then in the end, let's see. Oh, they get to so it was that the evil wizard stole the lady wizard's house. Wizard is a rat. It's not a chicken after all. But then after, I thinking about it a little bit more, I started doing a little bit of sketching of like, well, what would a chicken wizard look like? Like, what if I did like the sorceress from He-Man, but as an old lady chicken? And what would an evil chicken wizard look like? And so I started doodling a little bit in the sketchbook. And there's the final design, right? So my character designs are not like, when I'm doing mini comics, I'm not refining them and doing like a full turnaround. Like that was what I had to go with for the evil wizard in this story, was just that final sketch. And once I've got like a look, like, okay, chicken wizards kind of makes sense to me. And I think I've got a decent arc here with some character moments. I know not all of these are going to make it in, but I've got the through line of the story. Then I sit down and I do, here is the final outline, page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And I try to figure out what's one key action that happens on each page, because a Minicomics page doesn't offer you a ton of real estate. You know, you can comfortably fit about 4 panels on there, especially if you want to do like a lot of action stuff. And so, you know, page 1, intro of duo walking in the mountains on their way to Oktoberfest. Pickles needs to dance. And we look at page 1 of the comic. That's literally what happens there. They're walking in the mountains, and Pickles is like, I want to go because I want to dance. Page 2, they come across old chicken lady. She has unfinished business with the dark sorcerer at the top of Sutherland Peak. Are you willing to aid me in an epic battle? We're adventurers, not battlers. They climb the mountain. Pickles is excited about having her first epic battle. Lightning strikes. They fall. Pickles saves them. Dark sorcerer ominously, what does that say? Warns from top of mountain. Stay away. More lightning. Page 5, Pickles dances around the lightning. This is where we get to get more of her dancing. Chicken lady uses her magic to deflect bolts to help Taft. And page 6, they charge up the mountain. Chicken lady says, stand back. Epic stare down, aka or a la Wild West Dragon Ball Z. Pickles is stoked. Page 7, you never call me, the chicken lady says. You never tell me what's going on in your life. Oh, Mom, I'm a grown chicken. So it turns out that instead of it being an epic battle, it's just a mother and son squabble. And Pickles and Taft are uncomfortable because they're watching a family argument. And I don't want to, what is this? I didn't sign on for this epic battle. And they leave, right? So there's page 7 and 8. So that is what I have when I set out to begin the thumbnailing process, is sort of a page by page, 1 sentence breakdown after just doing some initial sketches. And I do not spend an enormous amount of time on those sketches, especially for a mini comic, because I want there to be some level of discovery in the making of the book. I don't want to have it like so planned out, but planned out enough so that what I'm really doing when I'm making the mini comic is discovering things about the characters to help them get to the end of that story, right? So some of those things, even in that 8-page outline that I described there, didn't happen in the final script. Like the part where the chicken uses her magic to deflect the bolts to help Taft. I remember coming up to that page going like, well, why would she help them if she hired them, right? And so that becomes a line in the story, is like, Taft says like, hey, sorcerer lady, how come you're not helping us? And she's like, I distinctly remember hiring you to take me to the mountaintop, you know? So setting it all up, knowing that not everything will make it in. Like there's that sketch that I did early on of Pickles like wafting the smell of Oktoberfest to Taft to tempt him into wanting to go. There's no room. Had to go. So
that's I would imagine. So Pickles and Taft, is there a classification of a mini comic project that has this your desired output was something different? And like, how would you describe that difference between like Chud with a Dream versus Pickles and Taft? They seem like they have different natures.
Yeah. Chud with a Dream is pure experimentation. The closest thing I have to a thing that I shipped that was all pure experimentation was a mini comic I did called Fish Don't Have Teeth, which was, it started out with the simple premise of what did Fleet do for a living before she met Boulder? And I thought, wow, maybe she was a manager for a tag team of wrestling fishes, which I had the sketches of the fish warrior guys in my sketchbook, but I didn't know anything about them. And I didn't know anything about what that story was going to be, because I did the mini comic for Mini Comic Day, or an 8-page mini comic in 8 hours. And you're supposed to walk in fresh, so you don't know what you're going to do until you sit down and do it. Mm-hmm. And that's like same with Chud with a Dream. It's very low risk. It's okay if I don't finish this. I have an 8-page mini comic that was called what's it called? Corporal RJ Rocket Punch. And I never finished it. I started it for Mini Comic Day like 5 years ago. And when I got to the pencil stage, I finished the pencil. Like, I'm really not crazy about this. So I didn't feel bad about just going, throw it over my shoulder. And it's actually in a drawer behind me. Whereas with Pickles and Taft, I'm setting myself up with the explicit intent to ship something. I want to have something that's printable at the end of this journey. So that's where like this small amount of pre-development goes in. And this is what I'm thinking about with the Baron von Baron mini comic. Like this, just doing enough, like drawing 4 pages worth of moments that could happen in the story, doing some sketches of the monster or villain or whatever, and then doing an 8-page breakdown of 1 sentence each, 1 action each for all the pages.
That's it makes sense. It's like this wanting to have something shippable. That's I still think there's probably a lot to potentially unpack there, but it's a nice distinction between something that is, I mean, it's the Child with a Dream. It's a workout. It could have potentially, I would imagine, you could have discovered something that is an experiment that becomes shareable, but it's it's successful as an effort just by being, a practice time. But yeah, something shippable. And yeah, that's and it's interesting how you have pared down like a whole life cycle for a project, that because like a big project would go through similar stages, right?
Sure. More intense and in larger chunks of time.
Yeah.
Sure. But each of these, like this sort of like truncated, shortened version is something that you can do. Development sketches that I did in my sketchbook, but it's something I could do in an afternoon, right? I could sit down and maybe take 2 hours and sketch out like the 6 things that that could happen in the story. And I find that what keeps me moving forward is to let go of the fact that maybe none of this will be on there. Talking about this on Fabulous Secrets on my Patreon was like, I catch myself for once in a while falling into like, what if it's the wrong panel? Well, then draw it again until you find the right panel, and it'll be okay, right? So letting go of it and not trying to commit to anything until you have got some reasonable character sketches and like maybe 10 or 20 moments figured out, and then try to like organize them into an 8-page sequence. I find that's helpful for me anyway.
Yeah, it's that's somehow you've by embracing the constraint of short term yet shippable, and then you've whittled a process for whittling that is robust enough. That's it seems great. It is the process you described is pretty close, pretty similar to what I did for Two Pizza Team. Like one thing I can think of that I did in addition, as far as developing the story, is I did this record myself sort of campfire storytelling style, just making it up, make up a story about these characters and see what comes out of my head. And I did that a couple of times. And then, yeah, and I went through some probably a little bit longer, but also still informal process as far as discovering what do these two even look like and what does their world look like. So I spent more time with the sketching and whatnot, and I accumulated lots and lots of effort, potential conflicts and antagonists, whatnot, and then just, gosh, I went through so many iterations as far as what they might end up looking like. But I had so a similar desire for a shippable product, and it's an experiment. Like Two Pizza Team, No Trash Talk is an experiment as a product to see, well, I don't know, what do people connect with in this whole thing. The aesthetic,
that's a good framework that you're setting up for us to think of. And Taft was meant to be shippable. I still don't know if my hypothesis is true that a cute pig and a battle tortoise who are best friends is a good idea that will connect with people, right? I don't know if that's true until I run the experiment of drawing an 8-page story about it and then sharing it with people, right? So I'm sorry. And so you were doing the same thing with the Two Pizza Team experiment.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, and like one little sort of toolkit thing that I thought was a little bit different was that like recording myself trying to tell the story of what this comic is, and or just improv a couple of scenes in a just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, capture a little audio snippet.
Yeah. That's an interesting approach to doing it, like to riff live with yourself that way. Because I do find that, like, they talk about writers' rooms and being around other creative people and doing yes-anding with each other tends to net some pretty interesting results. But a lot of the stuff that we wind up when we do this kind of work, we tend to do a lot of it alone. And so, do you share those recordings with anybody, or you just like review them yourself?
I
'Cause you
review
shared
them
the
myself.
sketches.
Yeah. I mean, pretty similar to like, so I may develop in public with sharing a sketch now and then and see what kind of likes or reactions or comments I get. But then with those little recordings, I haven't shared them publicly yet. I might be a fine idea, but
Well, I don't mean
haven't
necessarily
done
sharing
that.
in public. I mean like just sharing with people you trust. Because I know you shared
Oh, yeah.
early drafts of Two Pizza Team with Kate and with the kids, and then later on with me to get feedback. And I know when the sketches I was showing earlier of the the story ideas for Pickles and Taft, I mentioned that Anne gave me feedback on that Rat Wizard very early on because I would share those little pieces as I went to say, okay, what are you reacting to here?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think I might try that. So far I haven't, but I guess yeah, I might share one of those ideas. If it's a small snippet, not going to take up too much time of someone who I would love to get their reactions to, or maybe some yes ands. That could be a pretty fun experiment, good exercise. But so far, I would just get value out of just re-listening to it and reacting to myself, and hearing gaps in logic or just opportunities to just I meandered a bit there, but this little element of just trying to do a simple task that gets really complicated. I want to use that.
I'm looking up.
That helped me then outline.
Gotcha. Yeah. Because actually, some of the folks in the chat, Robert Clemens Jr. again is chiming in about like sometimes it's just fun to just start running with an idea and sometimes put structure in later. Yes, and I was trying to find some of my that black hole equation mini comic that I did ages ago, way back in 1995. Oh goodness gracious, is it right here? Let's see if I can pull it up. No, never mind. I'll have to put it in the show notes because like the one that I did in an afternoon where I just started running and I just drew for I don't know 4 or 5 hours and then I had a mini comic. It started with the premise of I want to draw a spaceship blowing up. I mean, that's really where that began, right? It's like start with something that would just be fun for you to draw and try to build structure around a fun idea and just didn't have fun with it. Yes. But other times, some projects you want to, when we say experimental, there's a difference between experimenting and playing sometimes, right? Experimenting is testing a hypothesis. What's your hypothesis? I think a story about two pizzas who are best friends and get into fights with garbage is an interesting and viable idea for building story and potentially other things out of it, right? Okay, well, the experiment is testing that idea by putting it in action so that people can interact with it. And the only way you know that the experiment is actually, underway is when people interact with it.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. I mean, it's not a full cycle of creative effort if you're just only riffing with yourself. And you get data. I mean, the whole idea of an experiment in the scientific method is getting observable evidence and of some natural phenomenon. So something exists, and you put it in a you put it out in the world. And you see how it goes. How does it perform? So
right,
same.
So how about we take a break, and after the break, we come back and look at some questions that we ask ourselves to know if we even have a hypothesis. It's all well and good to have some kind of ideas smattered around and swooshed into a sketchbook, but how do you even come up with the hypothesis to build the ideas off of to create the experiment? Did I explain what we're doing next?
You did. How do we get to that hypothesis? How do you, and it's like, you could have a question or a belief that you're like, this is a testable idea, but is it the right one?
Yeah. And how do I even know that it's at the point where I can start testing it, right? Is it even like a fully formed idea yet? So we're going to do that in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. Before we get there, we have to thank some people who make this show possible. And those people happen to be the folks who support us on Patreon. Yes, patreon.com/leanintoart is the website. Patreon.com/leanintoart. It should be easy enough to remember if you downloaded the show, right? Lean Into Art is the name of the show. Patreon is the name of the service. What's the service? It's a way for you to give us a monthly upvote. You can say, like, I believe in Rob, I believe in Jerzy, I believe in the stuff they make. I'm going to chip in $1 a month to help make the show more sustainable. And we want to thank 5 people for doing exactly that. First up, Merjam. Merjam, thank you so much for leaving us. You can find Merjam on Twitter at MYRJAMBDV. Merjam is up to some comic stuff on Twitter you can check out there. Also, Esprit Devra. You can find Esprit at WeAreLA Tech on Twitter. Thank you, Esprit. Also, Angela Mitchell. Thank you, Angela. You can find Angela on Twitter at Angie Makes Stuff. All of these will be listed in the show notes, by the way, at patreon.com/leanintoart. So you can connect with these people and follow up with them, because if they get enough out of this show that they decide to support it, then you probably have things to talk about with them too. They probably are doing some interesting things with visual storytelling. Also, Shawnee Redfearn. Thank you, Shawnee. You can find Shawnee on Twitter at Shawnee Redfearn. And finally, Kelly Ishikawa. You can find Kelly on Twitter at Kelly of Ishikawa. You can join them at patreon.com/leanintoart, where you'll find all the shows we make, including the extra leans, the shows we record only for people who support us on Patreon. It's Rob and me riffing live about a variety of topics and coming to some kind of conclusion in 18 minutes or so. Patreon.com/leanintoart. Thanks to everybody who have been supporting us there.
It really means a lot. Thank you.
All right, time for some more transition music as we go 10,000 feet up. Yep. Time to dig deep into the files of Teletran 3. Find out how we know it's a hypothesis. What?
That's the music. I'm affected a lot by music, so I'm just like, There's a very, there's a groove, moody groove.
Shadow Wingtronics is in the chat. You know what that's from. You know what that's from. You can tell us all. All right.
So yeah, how do we know we have a strong enough hypothesis? And is there a set of questions that we can go about taking a look at what we've amassed so far, where we can decide if we're ready? There's the title of this episode, right? It's a pre-flight checklist for Minicomics.
Yeah, and the way I phrased that specifically because I was thinking about this in the last week is like, okay, if I am going to go through with this little experiment that I wanted to do in October, how do I know if I'm ready? And I noted that there's certain things I look for in my own project. So this is not so much of a checklist that will ensure success with every project. Remember, we called them experiments. Experiments also, another reason I like that word is there's no guarantee of success, right? Experimentation is its own reward. It's not something where you're, guaranteed results. You're guaranteed knowledge and insight.
By structuring it well or well enough, you're guaranteeing learning is the return on your effort versus avalanche of cash.
Right. So these are some of the things that I think about, and I share them only as a way to, invite the inquiry of like, what's your checklist? What are things that you look for to know that your stories are ripe? So perhaps you can create your own checklist, or borrow some from mine, borrow some from Rob's. But for me, an important part of any project that I do is character voice and character interaction. And can I use this? Can I express the story as much as possible through character action and character voice, right? And so one of the first questions I ask myself is, do these people have something to argue about? Do these people have differences of worldview, outlook, opinion that can express themselves in the plot? In other words, If I put these two characters in front of challenge or goal, how will they react to that thing differently? Or if they react to it the same, what's the different inflection on what they want from it? So, for instance, example of Boulder and Fleet is person in trouble down the road. Boulder's going to say, oh, there's somebody that needs my help. Fleet's going to say, oh, there's somebody who probably will hire us to help them, right? Very different points of view, but they're motivated to do the same thing, right? So that's why their partnership works. But if you really break it down, their motivation is very different. I did a story called Mining for Trouble on boulderandfleet.com a couple of years ago. And I remember it occurring to me pretty early on in the writing process that the mineral gals, the villains of the story, I could find fun ways to express their inner lives in dialogue exchanges where you have the main or the self-appointed leader of the team is this green rock gal named Sapphire, and her sort of second in command is this brownish purple rock girl named Rube. And Sapphire she does classic projection technique where if anybody disagrees with her, she says, you're not in it to help the team. You're not committed to this thing. You're not committed to like this group effort. We're trying to create glory together and whatever. You're only thinking about yourself, right? But in truth, the reason she's so angry is because she wants this team to be famous so that she can be famous. It's all about her, and all of her motivations come from her. So I tried to seed that in the dialogue as much as possible. So thinking about what do the characters have that they could totally disagree on, and how can that disagreement reveal something about the character's inner motivation? So like I run this activity in my classes all the time. It's like trying to give characters something to argue about. And sometimes kids will find things like, well, this guy hates peanut butter, this guy loves peanut butter. I'm like, okay, that's something. Can that be, and here's the second question, can that disagreement reveal itself in the plot of your story? Can this disagreement these two characters have reveal itself when they're both confronted with some pivotal point in the plot, right? So another way I think about it is like, are these characters baked to the point where I know how this person would say, let's go over there, as only that character would say it? This is something I picked up a lot from Dan Mishkin, from working with him and from reading his comics as a young person, is that all of his characters, you know what their worldview is while they talk about, making a sandwich. The way they talk about it will reveal something about who they are.
That's a really interesting, like, signature concern. And I assume that came into your storytelling, like your checklist at some point.
Yeah.
So once you become aware of it, and so this probably is something for all of your stories, not just Minicomics, I imagine.
It's something I try to be very alert to in any project I'm working on. And it's something that even when I team up with other people, it's like that conversation will happen while we're working on the story. And even on the Amazon comic I'm doing with Dan Mishkin right now, it's really fun because we both really, really sweat that stuff. And so when one of us catches the other on it, like we'll be talking through an idea and I'll be like, oh, and they could say this. And Dan says, or they could say this. And he like changes two words. I'm like, oh, that's so much better. That's so much better because it tells us so much more about that person, and like we've literally been sitting in the same room together. And like he stood up and goes, ding, 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 and points at me excitedly because we nailed like just the right. And it's something really dumb. It's like, there's a line where a character says, you are your mother's daughter. And I'm like, and we both did it like ding, 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 ding. So good. Yeah, it's something that's one of my personal fascinations with comic storytelling, is that dialogue. I used to think that dialogue in comics was, oh, you just read it aloud, and if it sounds natural, then it's good. In recent years, I've come to believe that it's more like poetry, and it has a different kind of rhythm to it, and it has a different function. The words, Brian Fees said this when he did a talk at the Ann Arbor District Library. Brian Fees, who did the award-winning book comic Mom's Cancer, he said that like it's kind of like pop music, where it's like if you take the dialogue and the art apart, just like if you take the poetry of pop music and the music of pop music apart, they're both not that great, but when you put them together, they're really good. you know? So it's like the dialogue in comics is kind of like cartoon, like if you could cartoon words, that's kind of how I think about it now. Like how a cartoon clarifies and simplifies a form to communicate something about its inner life. The words you choose do the same thing. And I haven't thought about it enough to where I could write a book about it yet, but it's something that I feel in my gut when I'm writing stories. And so that's one of my big checklists, my checkpoints to look for that.
Pretty sure you've thought about it enough, but pretty sure you're ready for that book. That's another conversation.
All right.
That yeah, okay. So character. Yeah, I care a lot about character voice too. I kind of have a I kind of have an old "Is it ready?" checklist that I would use for when I was updating my webcomic Art Geek Zoo regularly. And it's something that I taught in. I also teach in the workshop, writing and drawing serial comics. ... The dramatic reveal. Anyway,
Yeah.
So the technique is sort of are these certain 4 ingredients present, and I tried to do it every single page basically, and it was am I doing right by the character's voice? So it's almost like you're getting to know more about those characters. Am I adding just a little sprinkling of showing something about the world? Just a little bit of extra, an element to act or react to. And then do I feel something from this? Am I laughing or left with some kind of concern? It could be, I mean, it could, so I basically, am I angry, mad, or sad, or happy, right? Does leave me with some kind of energy? And yeah, I think that's roughly that basic list. And I mean, it's a lot to do in every single page, but I try to at least see that there's a flow to it and it's appearing frequently enough. And doing this process of, am I presenting, because in my early drafting stages of any comic, I've mentioned I think in the whittling episode, how my first drafts of anything are really bad, and I just let it come out, and it's bad. But then I work on it, and and then I can carve away and even throw it away to then be ready now to finally do the better draft. And I see if those things are there, and if I'm invoking one of the things I'm really into is how stories affect me with their dramatic reveals, which is, I believe, a series of questions and answers where I'm participating and guessing what's going on as a reader. And so I try to make sure I'm providing an experience that allows and encourages that. And it's not just open questions and then create a big confusing pile of ambiguity. It's important to answer as well. So panel to panel, page to page, and maybe story beat to story beat. And I try to think, am I doing that? And that gives, it feels like a story to me when I do that.
Yeah. Well, that is part of the essence of telling a story, is answering questions. But yes, you don't want to leave. That's a tricky balance to always strike too. Is I think about like the new Voltron show, which I just started watching season 7. Don't spoil it, anybody. I just watched episode 1 of season 7, and so 7 seasons, and like there was this period, I want to say like 3 seasons ago, where it felt like they were setting up more questions than answers, and it started to get kind of like a little bit heavy and laden. I'm like, oh, come on, are we gonna? And the moment they started answering some big questions in the series again, I was like, okay, things are starting to feel like it's got momentum and it's light and it's fun again and it's emotionally investing. But I feel like there's momentum, right? And I feel like if you don't answer the questions, if you don't answer them enough, things start to feel like it's getting too loaded up with like, well, why am I here? Why should I care about this?
And there's a combination of both, maybe meeting expectations, because you're in having that playful that active experience of consuming a story, and you're creating that experience for, well, consuming a comic. Well, is there, let's see, are you playing with what they expected and maybe playing against it, but only half delivering what would be expected? So you give delight and surprise, and but not noise. So everything being non sequiturs, unless that's the style of what you're creating. So
yeah. I think about that, but I think about it more in terms of, am I surprising myself? That's what I'm trying to find, is like, if I can surprise myself in the construction, or like the assembling of the ideas, then I feel like, okay, well, if it surprises me, it's probably going to surprise somebody else, I hope.
Now, what about, are there new things that you're working on? Like, I have a big thing that I've been carrying with me as a storyteller, and I don't make nearly the amount of comics and stuff that you do. So I've been carrying this with me for a good chunk of time, but I'm trying to get better for me as having reaction moments in my stories, because sometimes it's like, well, I got my checklist. I got the world, got the characters, got the, the dramatic reveals, open, close questions, and dot, 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 dot. No time to breathe. Right. And it's, not enough punctuating moments that, anyway, something about my stories, I noticed that. So now I'm like, okay, my checklist now has, I need to insert these breaks and reactions.
Right.
So that it's,
so
you can feel together.
And it's funny you bring that up when we're talking about 8-page mini comics, where you really don't have a ton of page real estate to go into that. So here's a way I think about it, and this is going to sound very mechanical and very prescriptive. I don't mean it to be. It's more of a framework of thinking about how to fit all those things in with very limited page space. Okay, because you're trying to tell, at least, again, this is my personal point of view on this. When I'm doing one of these shippable mini comics, I'm trying to tell a complete story, something with a beginning, middle, and end in 8 pages. That introduces a world, that introduces a concept, that introduces two or more characters, and introduces them in a way that hopefully gets you to care about them, right? So that's a tall order. It's a big checklist. So the way I talk about this in my classrooms with my students, I say, okay, so page 1, this is your setup. This is like you and I think a lot of times I tend to do, my page 1 is a splash. Let me check. Captain Cat, former shark hunter here. Nope. Okay, so Captain Cat starts with a 3-panel page, but I try to start with like a big image to introduce, here we are in the world with the characters, right? So we got the cats in a boat at sea. So now we know cats in a boat at sea. Once upon a time, there were 2 cats in a boat at sea. Once upon a time, there was a bear pulling a wagon with a little bird sitting there talking to him.
Yeah, that's an establishing shot.
Establishing shot. And in that establishing shot serves like one primary function. It is going to introduce us to the voices of the main characters. They both have to say something that is something as only they can say it. And it should give us a sense of what their situation is. Instead of, I don't want my characters to say, boy, it sure is tough being an adventurer for hire, where we go around doing adventures for money for people. That's hard. Yes, it is, Fleet, my best friend who I grew up with.
I prefer money. Oh, I prefer to help people.
Right. So instead, I say the first line.
But that's what my dialogue looks like in my first draft. What you just said, it's what my dialogue looks like initially.
Yep, absolutely. When I'm doing my sticky note thumbs, like it'll be like that. Like Fleet's talking about that, she wants money. Boulder's talking about he wants to help people.
Okay.
And so I write the dialogue. Fleet's talking, are you hungry? I ask because I'm hungry. Funny thing about hunger, it's easily remedied with a little money. You think you'll actually charge for our next job? That'd be novel. Okay, so now we know that Fleet is not the most tactful best friend. Maybe not the most gentle. Maybe a little aggrieved because her ambition is being thwarted by her best buddy. And what does he have to say about it? There's more to this job than cash, Fleet. Right? Unfazed, unflappable, even though his best friend's giving him a really hard time from the back of the wagon. I'm like, he's pulling the darn wagon, right? So we get a sense of what these two characters are about. Okay, so that's what page 1's function is. Page 2, we should learn a little bit more about the characters. They should have some interactions with one another. And these interactions do not have to move the plot forward. This is just taking a breath to say, here's why these two characters love each other or hate each other or whatever. This is why we should care about these two characters. And then by the end of page 2, we set up like a point of curiosity that drives us toward the actual problem of the story, the plot of the story. And now we get to their adventure. So the bottom of page 2, you're already in the adventure, right? Page 3, elaboration on the adventure. Oh, hi, I'm a cute little bunny, and there's this mean guy in our town. Will you help us? Right? And then page 4 and 5 is like getting, meeting our antagonist and getting a little bit of elaboration on what they're up to, why they're doing that. Page 6 is the conflict, right, where we actually get into the fight scene. And then page 7 is like, sort of hitting the climax or the resolution. And then page 8 is, winding things down and showing how the situation is different, how the characters are different, or if they changed at all. They don't have to change. It can just be a reset button like the Incredible Hulk TV show or Highway to Heaven. So that's a way I think about it in order to give it that breath. I think of like the top of page 2 is where you take that breath before diving in. And then hopefully you can do a callback to that by the end of page 8. So like something I did on page 8 was at the end, there's Boulder and Fleet watching all the townspeople chase the bad guy out of town. And Fleet says, looks like we won't be getting paid for this one either. Oh no, Boulder says, looks like we won't be getting paid for this one either, Fleet. And Fleet says, more to this job than cash, Boulder. Boom. She's come around to his way of thinking a little bit when she sees, the result of their adventure.
So, I mean, that's a pretty powerful framework for chunking up the jobs of stages of flow for the story. That's yeah, and it's covering a lot of jobs in a short space.
Yeah, and it's going to feel very. If anybody here's seen the RoboForce cartoon pilot that aired in the 80s, Shadow Electronics is in the chat and says like this sort of style of dialogue and storytelling come from the comics I grew up with or the shows I grew up with. Probably both. Shadowing. I mean, I used to do a show called podcast called Saturday Supercast where I was like, me and cartoonist buddies were like deconstructing cartoon shows, particularly Sunbow shows, which was like a real big point of fascination for me. I spent a lot of time looking at what those writers were doing and the way those shows were kind of reacting to the 3-act structure of having 2 commercial breaks in the middle of a 21-minute adventure and how they had to take like all these various shortcuts and ways to clarify information into like really, really dense sort of story rich moments. But also the comics I grew up on that I really enjoyed did the same thing. But the RoboForce cartoon, which you can find on YouTube, is a great example of that, where if you're familiar with like Sunbow shows of the 80s, like they were very, very condensed. RoboForce was 21 minutes and it was trying to introduce the whole concept of what was going to be the series in 21 minutes. And it's relentless in its pacing. It just bam, 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 bam. It just like hits all of those, just like I was talking about in the Minicomic. So this isn't going to be for everybody. Like if you look at Pranas Najukaitis' Minicomics, and I highly recommend you do. I love his Minicomics. We'll link to them in the show notes as well. He has a very different pace than what I'm describing here. This is just my way of like sort of trying to hit all those points in a very small package.
I've seen that. So a lot of times with like a creative challenge, 24-hour comic day, I've made a couple of mini comics with that as a constraint, which is definitely more luxurious than an hour or just an afternoon or what have you. And it's more pages, which helps, but it's still pretty constrained in as far as time frame and development and all that, especially if you're supposed to go into it totally fresh. That's the pacing. Like, so a lot of times someone might take the whole idea of what what is a story? How many jobs am I trying to accomplish in these pages or this, this volume? And it's moments and not much changes. It's someone staring at a clock, feeling dread and a sweat bead for 3 pages. Right. And you could have many, many, many moments in there. You could have different, furrowed looks, thinking, realizations, even like a mumbling statement here and there. And like, oh, that's a moody thing. That's evocative.
Yeah.
That can do the job too. That's a pretty maybe a pretty different checklist.
Oh, absolutely. To go back to what Shadowing Tronics was saying in the chat, it's like, yeah, I'm coming at this from an approach and in sort of a taste that was developed from a very specific kind of story. I want to do rip-roaring, lighthearted adventures that kids can glom onto and get a quick and satisfying read out of. That may not be what you want to do. Right, like Rob was describing, like if I were to do something that was more autobio, like when I worked at a newspaper when I was 21, and I really, really didn't like that job, and the last 15 minutes before I had to leave to go to work, I would literally sit and stare at a clock and watch the minutes count down. I wanted to savor every last minute I didn't have to be there. And now that comic is going to have a very different pace than what I was describing for those Boulder and Fleet cat stories.
Yeah, but it still can have quite an impact, honestly. And it's
absolutely,
you can have maybe even similar jobs, but the pacing and feeling of it and how that transpires and what represents a character, you're doing more abstract storytelling at that point. Like a person is facing ideas as the antagonists and whatnot, their own emotions. More than something, emotions and ideas and world perspective embodied in something like, well, in another character.
I feel like we're coming up to being almost at the point where we can say we made a podcast. But we got to do final thought. And one of the nice things about having a live stream as we record the show is that the leaners can chime in while we're talking about this stuff. And I'm going to read Nate Marcel's question and ask you if you think that there might be some meat in there for final thought. Nate showed up and said, where are the best places to share mini comics? I have made some, but unless I had a ton of them, maybe I would feel weird about showing them at a con or something. You guys seem to have a venue just by your podcast, teaching, etc. But do they even have to be a hard copy? Is it the same? Well, let me see if I can scroll down. Is it the same for a mini comic on the web, PDF, etc.? Is it wrong to feel like I want to share them? Comics are so much work. I have found that if I don't have a great audience, the payoff is not great to do them. It's weird. I don't think there's anything. Well, maybe we should save for final thought.
Yeah, I think.
I was going to jump in and start answering him.
And that there's some good stuff there to explore.
All right.
As final thought in a minute.
Okay. So at least Nate, you should stick around. But everybody else, I hope you'll stick around because we're going to thank a few more people who make this show possible, and those people happen to be us. We make comics, we make mini comics, we make graphic novels, we make games, we lead workshops, and we want to take this opportunity to share a few of the things that we make in the hopes that you will interact with them. And the thing that I introduced myself as a cartoonist and teaching artist, which is to say a person who makes graphic novels and then teaches people how to make graphic novels for a living. I get paid for this stuff. And the thing that I hope you'll check out right now is Science Comics Rockets at sciencecomicsrockets.com. What is it? It is a comics documentary about the history and science of rockets as told by the animals who participate in rocket history. It's published by First Second. You can find it in bookstores everywhere. This Sunday, if you're in the Ann Arbor area, Ann and I are going to be at the Carytown Book Festival, where we're going to be doing a panel talking about nonfiction comics and why comics are a good medium for nonfiction. We also just got published to YouTube. You can find it in my Twitter feed. A 20-minute talk that Ann and I did at Nerd Night Ann Arbor on how we made Science Comics Rockets. We did a little bit of cheeky digging at this notion of like, one of the questions we get is like, how did you survive making a thing together? You're married. You're supposed to hate each other. Okay, well, let's answer that question, and we did in that talk, which we will also link to in the show notes.
It almost sounds like an alternate universe version of the Newlywed Game. It's like you're the wedded collaborators people game.
Where's the strangest place you've made comics together? But if you have purchased it, you know, a really cool thing you do, a thing that'd be helpful is giving it a review wherever, like on Goodreads or on Amazon, or also, I mean, if you have young people in your life, I mean, it's aimed at middle grade, but you know, School Library Journal recently gave it a review and said, you know, this thing is a really great read for adults as well. We tried to write it so that it'd be fun for everybody to read, but it is aimed at middle grade students. So, I mean, if you have somebody that age in your life, this would be, you know, holidays are coming, everybody. ScienceComicsRockets.com has links to where you can read an 8-page preview and where to purchase it. Rob, you made a game.
I did. And I also love that book, Science Comics Rockets. It's so awesome. And I didn't make a game about that, though. The game I made is called This Panda Needs You. And, well, it's a mellow yet fun and mildly challenging game where you are about you're stacking blocks to match patterns. You're solving puzzles that are physical, based on shapes that fall down. They're actually just fine. A panda's walking through this bamboo forest and whatnot, and, you know, and everything's fine. There's a cool little stack of shapes, but cloud comes along, whoosh, knocks everything down, takes off, doesn't apologize or nothing, but you're left here with this panda to help put things back together the way they should be. And it starts off super easy. It's meant for honestly, you know, young children, but then as we've tested it and have tabled and convention, been out in the world with it, we find lots of adults like it too, because it's mellow. It's a very relaxing game. There's over 50 levels. It's available for lots of platforms. iOS, Android, phones and tablets. It's also available on desktop as well. And you can get to all those different platforms by going to this-panda.com.
And if you have purchased the game already, a great thing you could do is leave a review wherever you purchase it. Tell a friend, especially if you have any friends with young people in their lives who have iPads or Android tablets. That would be nice. This-panda.com. But let's suppose that you're here because you like the way we think about stuff. You're not so interested in the stuff we make. That's fine. This show is a thing we make, and we have more self-contained things like that at leanitoart.com/workshops, where you can download videos, video workshops that we've developed at a price of your choosing, even free. And if you do get some value out of it, great thing you do is like purchase it for a friend. And that's like giving us a tip. You know, if you did download it for free. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, giving it a thumbs up helps more people find the show. And if you were listening to it after the fact in a podcatcher like Apple Podcasts, leaving a 5-star review helps more people find the show as well. And we thank everybody who's been doing those things. It means a lot to us.
It does. Thank you.
All right. Final thought time. You want to kick it off, Rob? Do you have any reactions?
Yeah. So let's see. So Nate Marcel asked, I think, described a few different tensions as far as making mini comics. I mean, the amount of effort versus payoff is certainly one kind of conundrum I'm hearing. And, but then so the effort versus payoff conundrum I'm hearing, and also maybe a perception of audience mismatch of sort of maybe I'm at an event and the context of this event isn't as mini comics compatible. I might be misinterpreting. What do you think?
Maybe. I mean, I guess if you think about like, so I've done my share of.
Gosh, there's another one too. Hard copy versus electronic.
Yeah, and I've got a reaction to that one too. But as far as like, do you take them to shows? Now, I take all my mini comics to shows. Even like Fish Don't Have Teeth, which was an exercise. It was not something where I was like, I mean, I was hoping I'd have a shippable thing, but it was definitely an experiment with leaning much more towards exercise. I still printed it up and I take it to shows, and I'll tell you why. If there's always a bigger fish, meaning there's always somebody who's done something much more polished and much more professional than you, then that means you're a bigger fish to somebody. And also, I don't presume that I am the final word on whether or not anything that I did is good. That's really up to an audience to decide as well. And I think we make things because we want to communicate and we want to share most of the time. Most of the time, sometimes we make things just for us, but a lot of times, I think we want somebody to interact with it. And I had this experience recently with my teen students. So I was closing on my teen class, and the topic of when I first started working in comics came up, and I told them that the very first thing I did was a 22-page comic book that I self-published in 1994, and I said it was absolutely terrible. You don't really need to see it. And they're like, well, now we have to see it. And so it turns out I had copies left, and so I brought them to give to the students as a thank you for your hard work. And you can see, like, everybody has to start somewhere. Here's my first effort in this. And a couple of kids were like, this is really good. Like, why are you bashing this? Like, this is like really good. And I'm like, oh, that's right. You know, we are so quick to beat ourselves up for our earlier work, but we have no idea. This is why I keep a lot of my stuff in print, is because, like, not up to me if it's uh, you know.
Well, the fitness, right? I mean, inherently,
Yeah.
it's there's a big something missing if you're not having it in the world so that others can make that choice.
Right. So, and yes, it might feel weird at some comic shows to take your personal experimental mini comics. Like, I've been to shows where, you know, Captain Cat, former shark hunter, just doesn't fit in. Like, this does not meet the expectation of the crowd who's arriving there. The people there are looking for glossy superhero comics with Deadpool and Venom on them, and that's fine. It's just, it's not the place where this is going to be met with, like, a lot of curiosity. However, I would say this: have you looked into any local art fairs? Like, there's you know, like in Michigan, there's the Detroit Urban Craft Fair, and there's the Tiny Expo, and these are like small one-day events where people table all sorts of handmade crafts. So you got people who are making, you know, uh sweaters, you got people who are making furniture, you got people who are making screen prints. And when I go to these things, I find that this comic in particular, this little, you know, silly comic about my cats, flies off the table. I can't. I do better in one day at that show than I typically selling mini comics than I do at a traditional comic show selling graphic novels. Why? Because the audience is totally different. They're there to discover. They're there to say, what's new, what's different, what's novel, what can I find that's interesting. And if you've got something, this is a good way to test your hypotheses, is that you've got all these different experiments saying, like, I think this is an interesting idea. I think this is an interesting idea. And if you have like 5 or 6 of them lined up, you get really good data. So, like, I find that, interestingly enough, I was using Pickles and Taft as an example this time. I find that Pickles and Taft does not perform as well as Captain Cat, former shark hunter, at those craft fairs. So I don't have any information as to why. I just have the information on what sold and what people react to when they come to the table. But so that's one thing. And the other thing that I would say about whether or not to keep the digital or in print, I say both. And as a matter of fact, I've got up on the screen my Amazon page, my Amazon author page, and I've got my mini comics on there for sale. Right? You can get them at a price you're choosing on Gumroad. But if you're like really into Amazon and the Kindle, Boulder and Fleet's there, Captain Cat's there, Pickles and Taft is there, right? The Front Rebirth is there, which was published in 2006. Wow, is PPV on there too? I'll be darned. You can actually get copies of my 2002 miniseries PPV.
Oh, cool.
So, my attitude is, like, put it wherever people can find it. My mini comics have become part of my webcomics feed. You know, they're a thank you that I give people when they sign up for my Patreon. I don't think there's anything.
Sometimes a business card too, which I took that idea from you.
Absolutely. This is. I'll try not to be so angry about it, because I get really frustrated when I go to a convention and I come back with these business cards that have really cool art on them and a person's name, but I really don't know anything else about it. And if you meet 30 people at a convention, it's going to be really, unless you're really, really good at doing that Andrew Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People thing, you're not going to connect each name to each face. So one thing that I think about is I carry, so here's my Pickles and Taft Mini. That is the fancy screen printed version on, what kind of paper is this?
Cardstock?
Yeah, but it's an acid-free cardstock that I got from French's Paper in Michigan. So it's not cheap. Like these mini comics cost me like $1.50 a unit to make. They're not cheap. But then I also do just cheapo Kinko's editions. I'll hold them up side by side so you can see. Like
2 editions.
Yeah, so I have a cheapo version that I do at Kinko's where this like only cost me like 70 cents or something to produce each unit. And this is what I carry. I carry a number of them in my bag as a business card. Why? Because this tells you everything you need to know about me as a cartoonist. It tells you what kinds of stories I like to do, what my capability is as a cartoonist, and hopefully it gives you an entertaining and memorable experience with my name. So even if you don't remember what I look like or what conversation we have, you have this artifact, and it's like it's a cheap little thing that's easily stuffable in a bag. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to do mini comics and a lot of reasons to print them and a lot of reasons to share them. Is everybody gonna love what you do? Heck no. Yes, lots of people pick up Captain Cat Former Shark Hunter, but then I also have people who go like this, no, and then walk away, right?
But even that is data. Someone was walking by your table, the cover caught their attention, and it was enticing enough for them to pick it up. That is very interesting data, but yet they didn't, they walked away. So is there a mismatch of promise as far as, cover says this, people think something, they see something else.
Right. Thank you for framing that reaction to it, because yes, one could easily get bound up in this whole, but I'm putting my soul out there. Well, if you frame it as an experiment, then you're kind of reframing what your proper reaction to the information you get on it, right? So when people say no, like, okay, good to know, something happened there. And if I have the chutzpah, maybe I'll ask them what happened there. Yeah, Mushy Girl saying they must not have seen the center spread. Yeah, like Cat and Cat. I remember Ryan Estrada. There we go. We made a Ryan Estrada reference for this episode. He was very gracious and took a number of these to Korea to some comic shows there and gave me some information on how people interacted with it. And he said when he opened it up to the center spread on the table, a lot of people stopped because that center spread is a shark jumping over a boat with all of our principal characters looking up at it and, expressing surprise and shock and awe and everything. He said, like, yeah, that cover is nice and everything, but this is what that center spread is what tells you what is in the story. And as a matter of fact, after he told me that, I do display the books that way. I have it like this, and then right underneath, I have it open to the center spread. So hopefully that'll catch somebody's eye.
Yeah, it is such a different tone. The cover is like, quite Masterpiece Theater. I hear the three little quartet in the corner going, and but then there's a shark.
You open up the middle, and now it's Ozzy's Boneyard is suddenly playing. Yes.
Oh, right. That'll wake you up.
So yeah, I mean, what's the worst that happens if you put it out digitally? Is that people don't download it? Well, I don't think many people are interacting with my mini comics on Amazon, but they're there. They're there. People want them. On Gumroad if people want them. It's just like leave them wherever people can find them.
And once they exist, they can be used through multiple. Like you can think of it like we use the word experiment or experiments. It can be a series of research protocols where there are many experiments with that one device that you can deploy over and over and over because you have it.
Yeah.
So that's a way to deal with, like, the third part of the question was the effort versus payoff. And I think that's just a matter of like finding the right fit of your, how much should you put into this project for the kind of outcome that you're seeking. And even then trying to shape it toward a small product bias because you're doing a mini comic. So if you're spending, 40 hours on one page, it's probably not you're probably, creating a certain risk of ever getting the value that you want to get out of this. So
right. I have not made thousands of dollars off my mini comics. I'd have to go and do like a really deep dive into like my tracking that I've done over the years, but I don't think it would amount to thousands of dollars yet, right? It's chump change, but it's enough to justify an afternoon of being at a small craft show. But another thing I would say that
again,
the learning, yes,
the money is observational evidence. The money is another stage of interaction where someone, they stopped, they noticed, they picked it up, they looked at it, and then engaged in trade and said, well, I want to hand you this currency, so I may walk away with this. And that is data.
And that is when I feel brave enough or invited to ask why. What was it that grabbed you about this? What was the moment, right? Well, my cousin has cats and I know that they'll love it. Or, oh, I just, the idea of like cats fighting sharks is so funny to me, right? Or, oh, look at how grumpy this cat is. Isn't that adorable, right? Like, what are they saying about it that I can grab and use that as information to help me navigate the project? One more thing about this whole idea of investing the time into making things. Now, we've been talking a lot about like doing them as like warm-ups, experiments, exercise. I would recommend that everybody who is listening to this, if you haven't done this before, Google the Jake Parker 8-minute warm-up, or the 8-minute drawing challenge, or the 8-minute warm-up. I've been using this in my classroom for some time now. And what it is you divide a sheet of paper into 6 squares, and you draw the same thing in each square with as much detail as possible. So you take a picture of, take an image of a thing, and you try to draw that thing exactly the same way in all 6. But the first square you have 4 minutes, the second square you have 2 minutes, the third square you have 1 minute, the fourth square you have 30 seconds, then 15 seconds, then 5 seconds. Now, what's the point of this? Well, one, it's sort of like a warm up to get your hand moving, get your arm moving, to get started in your art day. But it also instructs you in what is the essence of the thing that you're cartooning here, because it's going to get simplified. And the other thing you notice is, I noticed this with my students, is they discover that I thought that my 4-minute one would be my best one. But for some reason, my 2-minute one was my best one. Sometimes we trick ourselves into thinking that we need more time to draw something that we don't need. And we give ourselves less time. And when we rush to meet that challenge, we unlock some kind of fluidity and some kind of fluency in our work that we were stymieing by hesitating and shaking and worrying about making it perfect at the outset. And when you just dive in and do it and push yourself, sometimes you can get better stuff by drawing faster. So I would recommend that you try that too, to see what kind of results you get and what it could tell you about what your optimum drawing speed is. The Jake Parker 8-minute warm-up. It's on YouTube.
That's really good. And is that where you picked up that warm-up, Jake Parker?
Yeah, I know it came from someplace else. I think he derived it from someplace else, but like he popularized it very recently, and that's where I came across it.
Super cool. All right. Yeah, it's a great technique.
It might have been in Yvonne Brunetti's book too. I'm not sure. Now I'd have to go back and look, but that's the easiest place to find it. So I think at this point I can safely say we've done a podcast.
Podcast has happened. That's a stamp that we should have digitally on the screen. Podcast happened.
Yeah, we gotta start working on Lean Into Art 3.0, where we start doing some stuff like that. Podcast happened. Right on the screen. All right. Well, thanks everybody who hanging out in the chat and giving us such great food for thought.
Thank you.
It's been awesome in the last couple episodes with more people showing up to interact with us and give us different prompts to work off of, so that we know that we're making something that's actually useful to you guys. Thank you, Rob, for navigating this topic with me once again.
Thank you, Jerzy. It's been great.
And we record this show every Thursday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, 9 p.m. Central. We stream it live on YouTube at leanintoart.com/live. And we collect it later as a podcast at patreon.com/leanintoart. And we will be back next week with another episode. Until then, I have been Jerzy Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jerzy Drozd on Instagram.
And I've been Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Instagram.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
Okay, everyone, I'm going to shut off the stream. Thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you.